Forward TV. The world is thinking.
Right, hello everybody. Welcome to Still the Opium of the Masses, Religion and Radicalism. This is the second in a series of 3 debates on secularism produced by the Institute of Ideas in association with Bishopsgate Institute. My name is Alex Hochuli. I'm the co-producer of these sessions along with my colleague Robin Walsh, and I'm a postgrad student at King's College London. Just to say a bit about the series, Secularism 2008 series, what it's trying to do is have a deeper look at secularism today, and both at who the critics of religion today are and also the critics of secularism. And in fact, part of the inspiration behind the series comes from actually Bishopsgate excellent collection, which we'll hear about in just a second. But I'd first just like to thank everyone here at Bishopsgate Institute for helping us organise the series. So I'll just pass you on now to Stefan from Bishopsgate, who'll say a couple of words about Bishopsgate.
I've got no mic, so I'm going to have to shout. Well, welcome everyone at Bishopsgate Institute, and as we said, the second in the series. There is a third, which is in our cultural events programme, so you want to pick that up and put yourself in, that would be great. Yes, I think it's an ideal place for this kind of debate. We have a number of special collections here which are particularly resonant for tonight. We have the archives of a couple of gentlemen who in the 19th century were the radicals and the religious debaters, a guy called George Jacob Holyoake and a guy called Charles Bradlaugh. You may have heard of these names before. George Jacob Holyoake, to make it a bit OK magazine, his claim to fame was the second from last person to be jailed for blasphemy in England. And Charles Bradlaugh secured the rights for atheists and non-Christians to serve in Parliament. And these guys were extraordinarily fond of a debate. Charles Bradlaugh was so keen in his abilities, he for a number of years called himself iconoclast on the debating circuit. And George Jacob Holyoake, once legendary, debated with his arch nemesis, the Reverend Brute Grant, for over 3 days and nights. Hopefully we won't go on that long tonight. We've also continued into the 20th century. We hold the wonderful archives of the British Humanist Association and the Rationalist Association here. So if you're inspired by tonight about the debates, come back and come in and look at the collections. You can literally just wander in and within 5 minutes have, you know, Holyoake's original arrest warrant in front of you. So please do come back. Just some quick admin things. If you could all turn off your phones. They've all done it. And enjoy tonight, and I'll hand you over to the panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Before I introduce the speakers, let me just say a couple of words about the purposes of this specific debate tonight. What at least I've observed is that there seems to have been a general change in the nature of the critique of religion today. What used to be the case amongst kind of reformers and revolutionaries, in general secularists and humanists, used to criticise religion and object to it for its emphasis on the afterlife rather than changing things in this life, and for helping people to come to terms with the suffering they experience rather than seeking to change the objective conditions which cause that suffering, and for deferring everything to the afterlife. Today, the critique of religion seems to be quite different from that, and this is really exemplified by the so-called new atheists, as it were, where often religion is now associated with radicalism in a way that it might not have been before. Religion is criticized for not kowtowing to contemporary norms, for being perhaps too violent, too confrontational, and for essentially challenging the status quo too much. So that seems quite a sea change in the nature of the critique of religion. Just to cite one sort of exemplar of the new atheists, as they're called, Christopher Hitchens, who sets up an opposition between the sort of rational, cool-headed, respectful secularist and the vehement, violent, agitating religious believer. He writes, "I leave it to the faithful to burn each other's churches and mosques and synagogues, which they can always be relied upon to do. When I go to the mosque, I take off my shoes. When I go to the synagogue, I cover my head." So the problem with religion, according to him, is, and I quote here, "the true believer cannot rest until the whole world bows the knee." So what we're trying to ask today is, is that really the worst thing about religion, that people hold too strongly to their beliefs? What's wrong with serious dedication to the cause? Or is there something different about religion which causes so much conflict? Is that really the problem? On another note, government also seems concerned about religion and politicized religion. In fact, just last week, I don't know if some of you saw, but the government issued new guidelines to charities warning religious groups about a loss of charitable status for the abuse or misuse of religious teachings. So, which kind of begs the question whether the government will set up a theological watchdog of some sort, maybe off God, they'll call it. The Tory shadow minister, also recently speaking, proposed as a solution to the radicalization of young Muslims that the best solution for that is the right kind of Islam, moderate Islam, even suggesting that the government should sponsor the publication of kind of new theological works which emphasize the more moderate aspects of Islam. So there seems to be, really across society, kind of a sense that religion is radical today. That really seems to have some currency. So we're going to try to unpick that today. So let me just, before I introduce the speakers, run through how the debate will carry on tonight. Each speaker will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. Before I'll try to kind of pick out some of the issues there, and then go out to the floor. We've got a packed house tonight, so I'd like to get in as many people as possible and get the debate started that way. So let me introduce the speakers in the order in which they'll speak. You'll notice one of them is not Mariam Namazi, who was previously billed. She had to pull out last minute due to illness. But so I'd like to thank firstly Fari Puya, immediately to my right, for stepping in at the last moment. So in the order in which they'll speak, firstly we have Rashad Ali to my far right. Rashad is Head of Policy and Research at the Killian Foundation, which is a new think tank of former Islamists. Rashad was until recently a leading member of Hizb ut-Tahrir and sat as an activities director on the secret command structure of Hizb ut-Tahrir Britain. Then he was then expelled from the party after turning away from Islamism. Rashad has also been a lecturer in 2 universities in Saudi Arabia, and he's a specialist in Islamic economic theories, Muslim sectarianism, and says he's an avid reader of classical Muslim scripture. Secondly, to my immediate left is Andrew Scott, who's a long-time activist in the student Christian movement, having also been on the Student Christian Movement's General Council. Now, for those of you who aren't aware with the organisation, the Student Christian Movement describes itself as inclusive, aware, radical and challenging. So we'll see if Andrew lives up to that. Andrew is a graduate in theology, and his research intends to further define the doctrine and practice of a radical Christian resistance to the unjust structures of the modern world. He currently works at Oxfam and cites as his influences Paul, Tolstoy, Gandhi and Zizek. Thirdly, as I already said, is Fari Puya, who's a founding member of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, who would cause a little bit of a stir when they set up, and he's also the head of the Iranian Secular Society. Fari presents secular TV on a satellite TV channel in the Middle East and is a member of the Worker Communist Party of Iran. Finally, to my far left is Dolan Cummings, who's research and editorial director at the Institute of Ideas and the editor of the IOI's reviews website, Culture Wars. He recently edited a collection of works, of essays by contributors to the Battle of Ideas 2005 called Debating Humanism, which I believe is at the back, so I encourage you to check it out. Dolan is also currently involved in initiating the radical humanist campaign group, the Manifesto Club, a project aimed at developing a new progressive politics. So now, without further ado, Rashad, will you please kick us off?
Thank you. The title I was kind of given was Radicalism, Religion, and has religion now become the new radicalism? I found it quite a challenging topic. And what I'm going to do for the next, I think, is it 7 minutes? The next 7 minutes, I'm going to make all these ludicrously wild statements, which I'm not going to substantiate in any way in those 7 minutes, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about it afterwards. The first things that came to my mind was basically, okay, we were talking about religion and radicalism. Naturally, people talk about the Christian right and they talk about Islamist extremism. So these are the two kind of main areas that come up, and sometimes I think you hear some really, I've kind of come across some really strange equations that have come together. People like Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, who made a direct comparison actually between an Islamist state and the rise of Christianity and Christianism in the US. The first thing I'd like to say is it's nonsensical to even make such an analogy. I say that as a Muslim who has some experience of Islamism, and the equation of the two, I think, is a misnomer. Whilst we have a rise in Christianity and Christianism probably in the US, as it's been labelled, and in various ways, I wouldn't compare that in any way to Islamist extremism, which is of a completely different breed. in my experience, and probably we can talk about that. The other aspect that I think is required is some type of contextualization in these types of discussions. Often amongst people that I've come across discussing this, I like to call it a danger of romantic relativism. People tend to look at this discussion in a very romanticized way, that particularly when they contextualize it to places like the Middle East and so on and so forth. The institution I work with, or the foundation I work with, the Quilliam Foundation, our director was imprisoned for 4 years in Egypt. And he was a prisoner of conscience. But again, what that tends to do is it tends to romanticize the movement that he belonged to, which was Hizb ut-Tahrir, and people tend to view them as some type of, well, they're struggling against a tyrant. Because as we all know, Mubarak is no Democrat and is not popularly elected. I think he actually, Majid told me that when he was in prison, he was joined by the chap who became the runner-up in the election, who joined him subsequently. So it's basically a dictatorial, authoritarian regime, which would then tend to place our sympathies towards anyone standing up against that. But there's a danger of that type of relativism coming into play and not realizing that actually, just by way of exemplification, what he wanted to do when he was with Hizb ut-Tahrir, what we wanted to do was remove these dictators so we could replace it with a just, pure, noble leader who would be able to unify all of the Muslim world through diplomacy and warfare and carry the noble, peaceful message of Islamism to the rest of the world by diplomacy and warfare. So it's not necessarily a good thing just because somebody is radical or just because somebody is standing against the status quo or even standing against justice. The expression out of the frying pan into the fire comes to mind. So that's, I think, is important. Also in terms of, it really does depend on how we view secularism and what type of interpretation we have of secularism and the status quo and how we interpret what the status quo should be. If we take and then contextualize that and look at religion in that context, if we take the whole, if we just leave secularism as removing religion from state affairs, so it has no role at all in public affairs. Again, that's going to be subject to different interpretations, whether it's the whole, almost a negative aspect. It should have no public, how to put it, no public role or even appearance, more like the kind of how the French state or French secularism, where Rousseau's notion of the state almost being the embodiment of the individual's liberty and the super-state concept that the state can now intervene and decide and impose upon individuals' freedom, secure for them if necessary. Or, again, there's going to be different views towards how secularism is viewed. Is it viewed that the state doesn't support any particular religion? Is it just impartial to religion? And therefore, if religion has a public role, is it something the state should not support or not prevent, but rather allow society to engage in? Is it just there to secure individual freedom and therefore secure the right of religious activity? Or is it there to ensure that religion should never ever interfere at all or even have any type of say to do with public policy and state? So it really does depend on that, and depends on your take on this. Because from there you're going to see, because then you will kind of view any type of religious interference in political affairs or social affairs as problematic. If that is the case, then it will be the Oxfam and anybody getting involved in Oxfam, anybody involved in charities which are religiously based or religiously motivated. Is this entering public life? Again, you'll have different spectrums of views towards this. How should government regulate religion? I mean, there's this, I was reading a paper about, the French model, where they're deciding that their interpretation of the Constitution and the amendments that were made in the 50s and the 60s was that we should actually interfere in religious interpretations and the whole off-God concept and prevent anything that is negative to our social well-being. And this is the right and the role of government to do so. I personally don't think I think it's civil society's duty to do so, as opposed to state's duty to do so. And I think civil society will be much more effective in doing that. There's also another notion, okay, how do I understand radicalism and its arisal, coming back to Islamism? I actually don't believe that the radicalism that we see within Islamist interpretations has anything to do with religion. I think it's an irreligious expression. It's an irreligious expression which has come about due to a combination of a number of factors. I know it's hugely debatable, but it's an irreligious expression of a combination of the interaction of religions and modernity, notions of state, of law, of legality, of constitution, canons. These are modern ideas, which when they interacted with the Muslims in the post-colonial or the colonial era, led to a type of reaction which tried to go back to something authentically to do with Islam, tried to make sense of modernity, tried to incorporate the two, and you had the rise of Islamism, which was where you had this notion and this idea that essentially you have to have a radical change of the world to fit the Islamist ideals of how the world should be. So I kind of view that as actually a political problem with where religion has been politicized, and therefore you have this rise in uniquely a political Islam or Islamist philosophy that has arisen. I've got about a minute, I take it. The other thing I'd like to throw in is I think really when it comes to religion, I think there are two types of political manifestations. One is when religion comes and almost adds value towards the existing ideas and motivations of people who are humanitarian, people have a notion of who want to do something good, and religion adds as a positive inspiration for that. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is the same way, which is whatever ideas you carry and whatever beliefs you have, these are the ideas and the mindset by which you are going to approach anything to do with scripture and text. And so religion essentially is not something that's purely divine. It's, well, whether it's divine at all is obviously going to be debatable, but it's not something that any religious institution can really claim is purely divine. The human interaction involved, speaking as a Muslim, the human interaction involved in that through history, whether it was the discovery of Greek philosophy, the interaction with Persian spiritualism or Hindu spiritualism that has shaped Sufi or Greek philosophical or even apologetic Muslim dialogue in history, is a demonstration that really it's the ideas that people carry in the civilizations and the societies that they carry that come and affect and influence the type of religious expression that people have. So I think the only thing that, to conclude very quickly, I think radicalism is more a product of a contention between modernity and a politicization of religion. That's my kind of take on it with regards to Islamism. With regards the Christian rise, it's more to do with reaching back to something which is as a result of what people may perceive or call radical secularism or a vacuous secularism, which is devoid of values. And this is kind of something where people are trying to redefine themselves. I'll end on that.
Thank you, Rashad. Andrew.
Although I'm here in part to represent the student Christian movement, I cannot claim to speak for the SCM or its members, the usual inclusive religious disclaimer, I'm afraid. But I do not intend to hold back from a radical Christianity, the sort that it is in part in question in this debate. But indeed, the SCM itself claims to nurture a vision of Christianity that is radical, by which we usually mean a faith which is alert and equipped to meet the theological, political and social issues of the day. Still, as I was deciding what to say in this opening statement, I realised that actually this vision, it finds a particular opportunity in the face of religious extremism and growing secular conservatism. A commitment to a radical faith, while still being revolutionary, means becoming faithful to a radical kernel. Etymologically speaking, to be radical means to go to the roots, to cut back to the roots. And I want to begin by sketching out a particular point about Christian origins. I'm, after all, a theologian, and the counsel of the SCM is to hold the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Earliest Christianity defined itself against the cultic political ideology of the Roman Empire, an ideology which justified massive conquest and hegemonic control, slavery and cultural colonization through a rhetoric of peace, security, the bringing of civilization and prosperity. This was a religious ideology. Rome had been invested with divine virtue and pietas. It is this pietas, the worship of Roma and the emperors, which guaranteed the ideology that pacified the colonies and configured the world around Rome. And I have written on the disastrous and unjust structure of Roman economics, which I believe is paralleled in global capitalism today. For the moment, it is enough to highlight the ideological comparison with global capitalism and the rhetoric of the war on terror. Both use a bargain between fear and safety in the language of terror and security, freedom, progress, science, wealth, and even co-opting the language of human rights and Christian heritage in order to drive an economic and cultural hegemonic configuration of the world. Now, in his letter to the fledgling Christian community in the heart of the empire, at Rome, Paul attacks these supposed Roman virtues and points to what in reality is a culture of death, war, slavery, decadence and depravity. By absolutizing Roman civilization and imperial power, Rome set itself up as an idol with the world at its disposal to command and enslave in order to feed its desires. But Paul does more than this. He declares war upon the Roman Empire. In the name of the Son of God, who is appointed such not by military, political, or economic power, but by the power of the Spirit of life, though he himself was executed as a criminal for sedition against the empire. Paul is now his emissary to bring about the obedience of faith, as he puts it, among the Gentiles. The letter unfolds to reveal a new world in which the Spirit rules through the freedom and vitality of a new community, where the worship of a crucified and risen God means an end of hostility, violence, cultural hegemony, and identity politics. The community are free because they live in the hope of a God who has the power to bring life from the dead, and are assured of victory because they speak the word of truth. Faith persists, I want to be clear, despite the ravages of the Enlightenment and religious dogmatism and grappling for power, because it isn't about testable propositions or control, but the story of a particular community and the question of who one serves or what one serves. The Christian always exists in a subjective freedom from the ideology and power of the state, a subjectivity constituted by its relation to the God of truth and life. If Christianity is to survive, it must begin to break free of the ideology of global capitalism and neoconservatism, as it's particularly tied to in America. For the situation in which we find ourselves brings us into questions of conflicting allegiances. Since Hobbes, Western secularism has at times masked what is actually a religious ideology in which the political state and the economic market takes the place of God, absolute, irreducible, free to configure the world around a culture of consumption and death. It is this supremacy in ideology and economics that the war on terror is designed to defend and extend. This, I would also want to contend, is why the Archbishop's recent lecture on civil and religious law met with such controversy. Western secular society cannot imagine a higher allegiance than itself, and thus is its own divinity. And the narrative of a pure Western civilization has become the justifying ideology of a conquest and colonization of a resistant barbarian other. Yes, the Church, especially in the US, are serving this ideology, but it is time for all people of conscience to prepare for war in the name of truth and subjective commitment to life.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. When I hear religion and radicalism, sometimes I think, is this sort of, are they really radical? Is this the right phrase to use for religion in this day and age? Let me tell you a story. After the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the first Minister of Labour, who went to Islamic Parliament, selected by a selected group of people, they undermined every labour code that existed in Iran, and sort of effectively denied there is such thing as workers, because they wanted to impose the most barbaric system of labour relations in Iran following the Iranian Revolution. The guy was on a t-shirt. He used to ride a scooter to his ministry. That was radical. That was unheard of. That was people were getting excited about this sort of Minister of Labour in a t-shirt, associated with the working class. And I was thinking, I was 19, and I thought this is not, worthy of my respect, because it's actually the after effect, the footprint is outrageous. In the same way that when I came to Britain following that, I saw Thatcher government. She was quite radical. She's tearing apart various conventions, consensus between governments of, post-war. She was radical. I was thinking to myself, is this worthy of my respect? Is the same a political Islamic movement today? Yes, they are actually tearing apart all the standards, all the universal values that people have. But I'm thinking, is this worthy of my respect? That's the point when it comes to radicalism. They're not, yes, they are different, because the situation is different, because people are demanding across the world. I've got experience of Iran. Personally, I've experienced the situation. People actually could demand the universal rights. People could demand the highest of things. When we cannot afford those, or, in power they can't afford it, they have to start to break up that universalist concept of humanity. And that's quite important. I'll come back to this issue of universal rights and universal values, as opposed to multiculturalism and sort of different values and different sort of standards that you have. Political Islamic movement, which is the spearheading rise of religious movements, political religious movements, it's industry. It's not sort of, religion, natural sort of phenomena that man one day used to look at the stars, look, I can't work this out, there must be something beyond. This is it's an organized political movement, has a state power in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, and everywhere the United States Army sort of leaves, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, wherever, and that's the future. Actually, this politicized religious movement is the religion of the New World Order. That's how I see it. And actually, we need to have a look at it from within this historical framework that we could see. And with that comes undermining any standards and values, universal values, and that's very important. You'll see that people are divided between different groups and religions, because, it's necessary to have, broken up society. Society which is divided based on different lines: ethnicity, religion, and religious order. These are necessary features of a contemporary society. And I'm thinking, yes, they're radical. They're different from 50s, 60s, 70s, Enlightenment period that were demanding universal rights for everybody. But that's part and parcel of today's society. And I think and that brings us to the point of sort of silent people, cheap labour, silent labour. Sort of that's how I categorise it. So, and then the question. Secularism has a role to play. Is it to replace sort of broader social movements? No, it doesn't. But it does have a role to play. Because it's important, I think. If you ask a woman sort of activist in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, if you ask a journalist in Afghanistan, Parviz Kambash, we've heard of him, that he's sort of in prison because he... And any journalist, any activist, any social activist in Middle East, what's your sort of relationship with secularism? So they actually demand secularism because they want this huge monster, which is actually has been, I'll come to this issue of sort of response of the, ruling class. In Middle East, actually to the upheavals and the demands from the majority of the general population. They have no alternative but to actually revert to this most reactionary and barbaric forms of suppression, and the rise of political Islamic movement it comes from this. And I think you need to be careful. You cannot separate political Islamic movement is a broad movement. It has one side of it is Taliban, is Islamic government in Iran, Saudi Arabia. You have the various organizations, and you have the softly spoken version of National Council of, Muslim Council of Britain, who actually are sort of adapting themselves to the sort of, environment of European sort of civilization, because they don't have enough power and force. So they need to adapt all those things, sort of internalize those systems of sort of discussion, but effectively undermining every single value standards that they exist in these societies. And that's what we're facing. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, if you're given a positive sort of value to radicalism, no, they're not really radical. But if you're saying that, yes, they are sort of moving on, they are tearing apart all the standards, yes, they are. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous movement, and the sort of evidence of that, it's look at the sort of the role of the Islam and Islamist and religious movements played in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, wherever, and even in the United States. In the United States, and tomorrow in Britain if you're not careful. And I'm with the debate on Sharia law, I come to issue of Sharia law. We need to be scared of discussion about Sharia law, not because we're scared of the debate, because we know what it means. It means that people are treated differently. It means that women would be treated differently. Of course I oppose it, and I'm scared of that sort of prospect that we'll have Sharia law in Britain. Of course, because I've seen how it operates in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, and in the streets of Paris, where the Islamist movement might have slightest sort of power and foothold over there. So coming back sort of to summarize what I have to say and my contribution to this debate is, it's Islam and political Islamic movement is industry, is a machinery, is backed by states. The slightest cartoons in European press, it's organized by the Islamic regime and embassies in Europe. It's organized by Saudi Arabia. It's organized by actually Islamic governments. So you're facing different sort of governments in different age, and the Islamic political Islam, the radicalism comes from the fact that it's only just is government driven, And it's not actually bubbling from below, these are desires of people, these are opium. It's not opium of the masses anymore. It's actually a very harsh and reactionary tool in the hands of the most reactionary states who want to actually impose barbarity, and that's synonymous with and very close to New World Order. And they work together hand in hand. You cannot define Bush era without the Ayatollah Khomeini and sort of Islamist came to Iran. New Order, that's part of it. You cannot define, Taliban without actually sort of the New World Order that has been created from the United States. They've been bankrolled all of those together. This is not conspiracy theory. This is part and parcel of today's sort of world, and we need to be careful. And the role of secularism actually is worthy of our respect, secularism, because it actually confronts this situation and it demands that society and public square needs to actually wipe away and push aside religion, and it's important for the health of the society. Religion is a private matter. I'm happy to sort of start a debate whether where the state's role is in sort of defining religion. I think that's quite an important sort of discussion to have. But the point, as far as I'm concerned, is that yes, secularism does have an important role to play and is worthy of our respect.
Dolan.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad we've had those three presentations about radical religion, because I'll come back to that later. But what I want to do actually is turn the discussion around and not talk about radical religion, but about mainstream society, and perhaps what this discussion tells us about mainstream society. Because I think that radical religion is a symptom of a more serious problem with mainstream society and even with secular liberalism itself. You see that from why we was talking about radicalism, why the preoccupation with radicalism and extremism. Why do we want to talk about the extent of belief rather than the substance of belief? I think that focus reveals something about what's wrong. I think there's a determination to avoid substantive debate and to engage with the critique that people make. I think if you actually look at the critique made by, let's take radical Islam, you see it's not at all exceptional. First of all, the war in Iraq has been a disaster. Well, yes, I think we agree about that. American foreign policy causes all kinds of problems. Not at all a fringe opinion at all. It's perfectly mainstream. Capitalism is soulless and materialistic. There's a problem with that. Yes, again, I think that most people would agree with that. It's undeniable. There's a problem there. How do we talk about that? Furthermore, there's a kind of moral decadence. There's a decline of respect for society. There's a breakdown. Yes, well, we hear about people drinking too much and throwing up in the street, and the kind of sexualization of the media. I think there's something in all of those things that, rather than discussing those and unpacking what's right in the critique and what's wrong with it, and actually trying to kind of treat people as adults and have a serious argument, instead we have a very cynical response, I think, that actually fuels the appeal of radicalism, especially for young people, because it's ultimately hypocritical. The buzzword that we always hear is moderation. What we need is a moderate form of Islam. I think, apart from the obvious fact that telling a Bolshi teenager to be more moderate is like showing a red rag to a bull, there's a more substantial problem with that. Which, if you think about what does it mean to say the important thing is that you're moderate? The sense is, well, you can believe anything you want as long as you believe it moderately. I think that just reinforces the sense that we live in a kind of relativistic time and nobody really believes in anything. I think that's taken to a particularly patronising tone when people talk about the need for a Muslim reformation. Now, particularly if Muslims are talking about that, that's fine, but when non-Muslim political leaders come out and say what Muslims need is a reformation, I think that actually just shows contempt. Apart from anything else, it shows a lack of knowledge of history, because the actual Christian Reformation was anything but moderate. It was certainly not about coming into line with secular values, and it led to all kinds of social upheaval. But more than that, it's just a constant refrain here. We don't really care what you believe in. Yeah, Islam, cool, fine, whatever. But be moderate, just sign up to the kind of basic things that we believe in. So, I don't know, if radical Islam is misogynistic, then can't you just be a little bit sexist? Kind of Church of England sexism. You can be a priest but not a bishop if you're a woman. Or if radical Islam is rabidly anti-American, do you want them to settle for being just kind of mildly chauvinistic and disdainful of the Americans? That's a much more kind of respectable British moderate way to be. But I think we do have to acknowledge that mainstream society, speaking in the name of secular liberalism, often is hypocritical. It is vacuous, and it does have to be taken on. That's why I floated an article yesterday, the idea that what we need is a humanist reformation. Rather than saying the Muslims have got to sort themselves out, let's look at what we actually do believe in, and actually start to ask if we really are living up to the principles that we believe in. Should we revise those principles? Instead of having kind of platitudes, we should have them take these things a bit more seriously. So on the Reformation theme, there's a funny anecdote about the Reformation. I'm sure there are lots, but one in particular, Martin Luther, when he was a young monk, at a stage he'd already started to have some doubts about the way that the church operated, but he was essentially a loyal Roman Catholic. And he went to Rome on church business and was horrified to find not only the corruption that was evident in Rome, but also the fact that the cynical attitude of his fellow clerics, their lack of seriousness about religion. And there was a thing that particularly offended him when they were doing communion, so they were giving the bread and the wine, which of course in Catholic doctrine is supposed to turn into the flesh and the blood of Christ. And apparently they would mutter under their breath, "Panis es panis manibus, vinum es vinum manibus." Your bread and you will stay bread, your wine and you will stay wine. So, as a devout monk, he was horrified at this cynical attitude, that even the functionaries of the church didn't believe in what they were supposed to be professing and what was supposed to be their vocation. And actually, I think if you think about Western society today and the idea of liberal values, there's something of the same kind of attitude. We're all supposed to believe in Enlightenment values, in free speech, but we kind of put things in scare quotes. Yes, enlightenment, it's terribly problematic, isn't it? What does that mean anyway? We have to kind of revisit it. Free speech, yes, terribly important when Muslim radicals or Christian radicals or anyone else seems to be threatening Western values. But do we actually maintain free speech? No, we actually lock people up for going on demonstrations and for all kinds of other things that we consider to be offensive that come up against these other values. I think there's a sense that, Western society, there's all sorts of great things about the development of Western culture over the past few centuries. We could talk about liberal values from the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. But do we really believe in these things, or have they just become empty slogans? I think very often the latter, that there's a kind of cynical view, it's all a bit more complicated than that. And so I think that it's not surprising that people react against this. It's a sense of an idea of a culture that doesn't really believe in its own values. Even some of the negative values don't really ring true. People sometimes say, well, Western capitalism is all about consumerism. It's a new religion, isn't it? Well, I don't really buy that. I mean, people are into brands and so on, but I think they engage in that very cynically. If you think of something, the fact that critique is now so mainstream. I don't know if people have seen the latest work of art by Banksy, who's painted on a wall a couple of kids saluting a Tesco flag fluttering at the top of a flagpole, and you think, oh yes, you see, that's us worshipping capitalism and mammon and so on and so on. But that's an utterly mainstream view. So that kind of critique of capitalism has become part of capitalism, and it doesn't change capitalism. To take something like, it's utterly orthodox. Any politician says, yes, climate change is terribly important, we've got to do something about that. And they do bits and pieces. But if they really believed in it to the extent they claim to, wouldn't more be happening? Wouldn't it be really transforming our way of life? So to leave Muslim teenagers alone for a bit, I think it's not surprising that non-Muslim teenagers can get very upset about this environmentalism. They see everyone saying that this is terribly important, it doesn't happen. It's a principle that nobody seems to follow through. So I think we need to go back to look again and say, well, do we believe in this? I think that we need to have a substantial debate about that kind of thing, about environmentalism, rather than just becoming part of the mood music and not actually changing anything. Can we actually investigate whether this is worthwhile? Can we look again at the kind of the values that we claim to believe in and reassess whether it really is worthwhile? I think what we need is a better critique of our own society, something that's worthy of young people's idealism. And I think if we did have that, then people would be a lot less attracted to religious extremism, which frankly is not very convincing anyway, unless you're reacting against a kind of a very cynical and hypocritical society. So to me, the proper response to radical religion is not to defensively shore up secular liberalism and say we must believe in these things against an external threat, but to engage in a critical assessment and to try and reinvent these ideas of the Enlightenment itself.
Right, so vastly diverging views there. We've had religion is the source of all universalism, truth and good and everything, or religion undermines universalism and is the source of all evil, or actually nobody believes in anything and everybody's a relativist. So really divergent positions. So let me just take up, firstly, Dolan, as you spoke last, let me take up something that you said. I mean, what you seem to be implying is that, well, it's just a call for absolutism, which seems to just reflect religion's worst successes of a kind of sort of dogmatism. I mean, is that what you're actually advocating and defending radicalism as such, irrespective of the content?
Oh no, I think that it does have to be criticised, but I think there's a very strong appeal in something which has principles and which follows through. It's earnest, it's sincere, and I think that, I mean, I would very much characterise our society as being predominantly cynical, and there being a lack of belief. So I think it's all very well to attack people for having silly beliefs or irrational beliefs, but if the response is to say, why can't you just be like everyone else? That's actually just conservative. It ends up being like Thatcher saying there is no alternative. You know, you just have to sign up to secular liberal values and capitalism. That's just the way it is. So I think that there's something in the idealism. I think we should encourage that, but what we don't need is a better idealism. And so I think it's too easy to just kind of knock down the kind of the excesses of Islamism, and when we actually need to be attacking the substance of the issues that are being discussed.
Andrew, let me just take up on a point, because I mean, you presented a sort of idealism along the lines, at least, of what Dolan was talking about. But it really sort of begs the question that why do you need religion and why do you need Christianity for that at all? Because really you could be a kind of consistent anti-imperialist along the lines of what you outlined. And what does Christianity have to do with it?
I think particularly Christianity has a definite narrative in which Christ is the archetypal victim of empire, and in which the imperative to speak the truth against power is portrayed, and it's through the rehearsal of that narrative that the commitment to universal truth and to life is measured and lived out for the Christian. I think myself that actually, in a lot of ways, the division between a religious person in these debates and an atheist are artificial, and that here we end up moving on to questions of metaphysics. But to the person who attacks capitalism and empire in the name of truth, in the end is serving the same purpose as the religious believer.
But I mean, but how do you respond to Ferbor's accusation that actually religion is undermining all sorts of or in particular politicized religion, undermines all sense of universality and truth, that religion is the ultimate enemy here, and that secularism has to really just stand up to that?
I think it depends on what you mean by universal truth. If you mean a truth in which all people can consent, and in which, you know, it becomes a lowest common denominator needed for stable society, then I think religion often upsets that, particularly when you're talking about a predominant meta-narrative or ideology. But the sort of truth that religion upholds is the breaking in of the new, of the radically other, which subjectivizes all claims to knowledge and being able to calculate and control and systematize the universe, which is, of course, the project of the Enlightenment, which post-modernity brings into question.
Right, well, there's certainly a lot in that, and I'm sure there's also people in the audience who'd like to take that up and many other ideas. Before I come onto the floor, I just wanted to ask a couple of other questions. I mean, on the other hand, this idea that secularism needs to confront head-on politicized religion. I mean, is that secularism as such? I mean, is religion really the problem here? I mean, what about kind of moderate liberal believers. And what form of secularism obviously is a broad thing, and politics can take a whole range of forms. I mean, could that what you're saying not just legitimate calls for a kind of a secular authoritarian crackdown on politicized religion?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, secularism is a standard. Everybody needs to enjoy that. When we say, people are treated irrespective of the religion, irrespective of ethnicity, irrespective of different standards, people need to be treated differently. You can't have somebody who's been beaten up, goes to the police, and police is like, well, this is a bit sort of within the religion, it seems to be okay. Or let's ask the mullah, see if that's, or ayatollah, or the bishop these days, to see if it's appropriate or not. No, people, if it's the same as child abuse and children's rights. You have a standard, same standard for every child. A child's welfare and needs is paramount. Children's Act, 1989. Why can we not have the same for everybody else? Why, when it comes to adults, the standard starts just universalism? When I refer to secularism, I'm referring to a standard that everybody needs to enjoy. But it's a separate issue. Society, as broadly speaking, needs to be concerned and confront religion. I think that's what it needs in public square. We need to be able to confront the fact that people can go and shut down exhibition in Berlin, or shut up people who are writing in newspapers. No, they can't. Society has a responsibility. We, as a general population, we do have a responsibility actually to confront religion and stand up and make sure that those exhibitions are open. Everybody has the right to, to claim that Kaaba is as stupid as stone. Yes. I was in Berlin, that's what happened, and tried to shut down the exhibition. People have the right to draw Muhammad. Do you know why it's important? It's not because we are sort of in love with, freedom of expression, we do it for the sake of it. Because these are standards. The fact that Muhammad is sacred is a binding that it upholds extremely reactionary and barbaric system that keeps sort of a structure within societies in Middle East. That's why it's important. The sacred, it's equivalent to barbarity of man and woman on the streets of Tehran, and they can't bear, that's what it is. Because you can't question Muhammad, hence you can't question its representative on earth, Ayatollah Khamenei, or any other Islamist, who's self-appointed, who has a turban and a gun. You can't actually question them, and they're very sensitive. And the representatives in this society over here, they come and say, you gotta be sensible. It's that religious sort of, religion has taken a persona. We had individual, you have to respect humanity. You have to respect individual rights. You don't have to respect religion. You don't have to respect any beliefs. See, religion has taken a persona, and actually individual and humanity has been pushed aside. States now claim, that we have to be respected in this power with religion, So religion, state, nationality, those things become important. Individual humanity have been pushed aside. That's the danger. So the world is sort of being turned upside down with this system. Hence, I think secularism is a standard that we need to defend, but society needs to be aggressive, uncompromising, bulldogish, confront Islamic and religious movements and say, look, hey, hold on, nothing is sacred but humanity. Nothing, and we have the right to criticize, because criticism is necessary. Criticism unbinds the bondage that exists in many societies and in many communities in this country. We think that's just, we have, everybody is free here. No, part of the society has been actually privatized to the Islamists and the religious groups, and more you'll have this, that you'll have parts of society and communities carved up. Hey, okay, because that could be under the control of the Muslim Council of Britain and the Ayatollahs and the mosque and the local leaders, self-appointed leaders actually. So, there is a need to confront religion, yes, but secularism is a standard that we need to uphold.
I think we'll have a chance to come back to that point. I think Dolan might want to respond to some of those points, because it kind of seemed to contradict some of the things that Dolan said, that the problem lies primarily with secular societies, lack of adherence to its own values. Before we come back to that, I'd like to take questions from the floor in just a second. But I just wanted to ask Rashad something about that. I mean, perhaps taking up what's just been said. I mean, is religion just particularistic, authoritarian, hypocritical?
You see, my kind of take on this is ideologies. I have a problem with ideologies per se. As soon as you go down this track that I believe in a mantra, a doctrine, and that is 100% correct, and anything else is, it's kind of that track that ends up with this kind of, whether it was, the whole, we're all against totalitarian states. We've all kind of had this history of being anti-Marxist and anti-communist and so on and so forth, and it's part of our heritage and so on. And we kind of have the same view towards, my kind of take with Islamism is the same. Essentially with Islamism what you have is you have a belief in an ideology, you have people who have a certain set of ideas which they believe that they must impose on the rest of the world because they believe in this idea. And I think this is usually what kind of leads to this kind of problem. The other thing I'd pick up on is, I agree completely with a lot of what was said in terms of we can't pander to Islamist agendas because this is a matter of principle. It's a matter of principle that if you start pandering to Islamist agendas, you're actually giving the whole idea some type of leeway. That's different to being crude about how to deal with this and engaging in a way that creates problems. I kind of had a lot of contact with the Danish press over the last few weeks, and the only thing I could understand precisely where they're coming from with the cartoons, which is this is a matter of principle for them, and they're sticking up to say that we're going to collectively decide to stand by all the people because of this, because of all the goings on. But I think what you end up doing is shooting yourself in the foot if it's going to achieve a negative result. Because the whole point is to arrive at some type of end. If you're not bothered about the end that you're going to achieve, then fine, do whatever you want. But I'm sure we're actually trying to achieve something when we do something.
But I mean, is this not just a retreat from any sort of principled politics altogether? I mean, are you just kind of... I mean, in your past you abandoned Islamism, but aren't you just throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, and abandoning any kind of political engagement as well?
I kind of hope I made myself clear, but I probably didn't. I think as a matter of principle, you should not give way to Islamists. That's my firm belief. As a matter of principle, because essentially the Islamist philosophy and idea fundamentally is that all of us here, we don't know right and wrong. Nobody here has the ability to use his mind to decide anything is right or wrong. That's the first assertion of Islamist philosophy, and therefore we need God to come and tell us what is right and wrong. And then you have this revelation which a few people, usually men, are going to interpret and tell you what God has told you is right and wrong. And then I'm going to go about imposing that as state law on everyone so that they can then live their lives in a way that's right and good. So as a matter of principle, from there, fundamentally, I think we're going to have some problems with the idea that nobody here knows right and wrong. That human beings are inherently not immoral, they're amoral. That whole notion, I think this is where we're going to have problems with this idea. So from a fundamental perspective, as an ideas level, I think these are the type of ideas that need to be tackled, they need to be challenged. And they need to be presented as well in a manner that should demonstrate this is, if you're going to talk about religion, this is going to be your specific interpretation of your religious tradition, which is probably very, very far away from classical tradition. That's my first assertion. The second is actually what you're saying is you're building on a set of ideas which people don't and can't establish. And therefore that's fundamentally where intellectually there needs to be an engagement from civil society, from wider society to come and tackle these ideas. I don't think the state can really get involved and do anything. Primarily because it's going to be suspicious, it's going to be viewed as there's a political context, people are going to say, so this is the whole thing with the war on terror. Let's be honest about this. We're living in surroundings where we do, when you get on the train and you see a chap who looks like a Muslim, 90% of the people that I know get slightly concerned. This to me, I was thinking, okay, am I going to make it to the next stop or whatever? And thankfully he got up and he got off. But the whole point was that there is a reality behind that. whether it was 7/7, whether it's 9/11, whether it's whether it's what's happening in Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, there's a reality behind Islamist terrorism. And whilst we may doubt the motives of the neocons, and we know, so forget doubt, we know the motives of the neocons is slightly less than just getting rid of terrorism. We can probably see that there are certain financial motives, and it's not coincidental that Halliburton, their defense of having the only right to the oil rights in Iraq, I remember on their website was, it's perfectly normal to lobby a government for rights. So that was the limit of their defense. It's perfectly normal in American society, part of American politics. So we know these are problems, but at the same time, to use the phrase you used, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in that sense that, yes, there is a problem with capitalism, there's a problem, but then you have to now negotiate. How are you going to deal with liberty? How are you going to deal with the individual's right to ownership of wealth? How are you going to deal with the individual's right to... these are human rights, and correct me if I'm wrong, these are generally seen as basic human rights. When people earn something, they own it, they have a right to dispose of it and enjoy it. People have an opinion, they should express it. When people want to do a piece of art, they should do it. And if people don't like it, they don't like it.
All right, well, there's plenty on the table there. Can I see a show of hands, actually, because I'm sure there'll be lots of you who want to come in on this. And we'll start up there on the left, yeah. And feel free to announce your name and affiliation if you care to.
All right, okay. My name's Bill Derodi. Wow, I thought reformed smokers were bad, but obviously reformed Islamists are pretty vehement as well. Red Ed Hussein's the Islamist. There's obviously a big outflux now doing the kind of circuit. And so I'm quite interested in getting you to think about what attracted you to Hizbut in the first place. Because I suspect that it's not so much the attraction of their ideas, rather the inability to find a coherent set of ideas in wider society and your youthful desire for some ideas that might have led you down that path. But maybe you'll contradict me. But my main point was really to the gentleman next to you, who I'm sorry, your name escaped me, but you made two quite interesting points at the end about why we should oppose organised religion, and the points you made were about censorship and the extent to which they are self-appointed. But if I want to oppose censorship today, I don't have to focus on organised religion. The BBC censors what I can hear in lyrics in songs leading up to Christmas. Brighton City Council also, for some reason, censors lyrics that I can hear in clubs when I go to Brighton. And in terms of self-appointed leaders, I also don't need to look at the religious world at all. Bono and Geldof, whose religious beliefs I'm not quite sure of, are also self-appointed leaders of Africa and the poor there. Greenpeace are self-appointed leaders of the environment, and the Internet Watch Foundation are self-appointed censors of the Internet. No wonder Mohammed Sadiq Khan wagged his finger at us and thought that he could speak on behalf of his brothers and sisters in the Ummah. We gave him that idea that any, hack can call themselves a leader of something that they've never consulted. But that's part of our mainstream culture. And therefore, just in a nutshell, the point I'm trying to make is, if we want to oppose these things today, it's not simply to religion that we need to look to.
Thank you. Just right here.
Aidan Campbell. I agree with what Donald was saying about the problems in secular society, but I disagreed with what you said about the idealism of religion elsewhere in the world. Because it strikes me that it's not really the religion which is responsible for the wave of fundamentalism that we're seeing sweeping the world since the 1990s. And that's maybe the reason why they're so unwilling really to talk about or even to consider debate about religious principles, or even to discuss the religious content. What I think they have, which the Western secular society doesn't have, is a system for organising society, for giving coherence to society. And what they talk about most of all, and this is what links the Christian fundamentalists in America with Muslim fundamentalists, is the structures and laws and regulations they've got for everyday society. They've got places for every single person in society, and they give identity to people in society. And therefore, fundamentalism is a social movement that gives coherence to society. And that is what I think people in the West envy about fundamentalist movements, because they've got a coherence which secular society in the West doesn't have. And that's why I think looking at it in terms of idealism and ideology, in terms of the religious side of it, is missing the appeal of fundamentalism. They have a way of organising society which is lacking in the West.
I'll take a couple more points before we come back to the panel. If you could just do these two gentlemen in the front.
A month or so ago, I'm Alan Hayes, I'm from Leicester. A month or so ago, I was appointed to the committee that...
Can you speak into the mic, please?
A month or so ago, I was appointed to the committee that draws up the agreed syllabus in religious education for Leicester. My aim will be to completely subvert this, because it starts off with religion and then gives the impression that...
Point the mic at your mouth.
That way around, okay. Okay, my aim will be to subvert the present religious education, because I think it starts off with quite the wrong thing. It starts off with what the religions are, the approved religions, and then how we deduce how we should behave from them. I think we should start off by teaching children what it is to be a decent human being and how they can relate to religions if others have them. This is, I was rather interested to see that on the Big Questions programme, which I took part in on Sunday, that after a spate of my religion gives me this sort of grounding, my religion gives me that sort of grounding, I got a fair amount of clapping when I said, but we bring up children to be decent human beings. There's a reasonable description of them, I think. I won't develop it, without any reference to hell and earth. And I got the impression that it was a great relief for people to be told that they can bring up children without having to bow down to these distant commands from on high. So my feeling is that we need to get a good idea of what it is to be a human being with the best information that we have currently available. For example, I'm going to infiltrate evolution into religious education rather than the other way around, if I can. This is our creation myth now, and so it goes on. But we need a new view of humanity in which we can encompass the religions, but in the right place.
I'll take one more point just to your right, or to your left, rather.
My name's Gabriel Kazabash. I would like to... my main point is basically that religion seems to be growing in irrelevance in this modern society. We have the rise of science, the rise of, debunking certain religious myths. And therefore it seems that this sort of new wave of radicalism is religion's attempt to be heard. It's its shout, as it were, because it cannot be heard amongst all this modernity. And it may even be a sign, perhaps, that it is its final death cry, which could signify the end of religion as we know it. And also it seems that religion now isn't necessarily an opium of the masses, but perhaps more of a stimulant. And people of religious affiliations want to be heard and not lulled into any sort of superstitious beliefs or anything like that. They want to be heard. They're trying to engage the world in their beliefs. And so it seems basically that religion is losing its grip on our world and is trying to regain it in any way possible, be it taking to extremes and blowing themselves up, as we see in 9/11 infamously shows what kind of lengths people would go to. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Right, we'll just come back to the panel before we take some more questions. Who'd like to come back on any of that? Rashad, would you like to?
Yeah, very briefly. What attracted me to Hizb ut-Tahrir? What attracted me to Hizb ut-Tahrir was when I was 15 years old. My school, which I love, so I'm not going to name, but my school, they invited a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir to come and give a religious assembly, and then he gave a religious assembly, which I found quite interesting. So that's kind of that was the way I met them. What attracted me to them? The first tract I read, which they gave, was called An Introduction to Economy. And it was a breakdown of modern economic theories, ranging from the whole spectrum of Ricardo to Marx, to Adam Smith. And it was a breakdown of their economic ideas. And what it did for me, it actually presented a critique of both capitalism and communism on an economic premise. The third section of the Introduction to Economy was an introduction to Islam's approach towards economics, or I would say Islamist approach towards economics. And it constructed a particular perspective based upon a number of ideas. The first of which was, if you just patiently bear with me a little bit, the first of which was essentially, when a mind passes judgment on something, it can judge things which are materialistically sensible. Any attribute which is not materialistically sensible by the mind, it requires some type of priori concept to ascertain a judgment on these things. As there's no priori notion of right and wrong that human beings are born with, which is identifiably sensible, that means morality, right and wrong, is not something which is intellectually coherent. Hence you have a subjectivity of laws, ideas and values from one tradition, one value system, one environment, one historical place and time, which is why this whole notion of relativism is, multiculturalism, relativism, the extremities to which it's led our societies to is nonsensical. But coming back, that was one of the core notions. The second core notion then was a distinction between, once you know what is right and wrong, why do you believe in God? Because then you have to prove God's existence according to that same criteria. So as you can't sense God, you can't know God's essence and His character and His attributes and His nature, what you can sense is the world. And what you sense about the world is it's finite. Whether the edge of the world is this microphone or this glass or whatever it may be, it is finite. And finite things have beginning and end. And nothing in existence comes into existence without a cause. So there's some philosophical usage of cosmology. I'm not trying to debate this, I'm just presenting what was presented. A combination of those two ideas means we need a prophet to define a political ideology. So now the connection is not to, we need a prophet to gain salvation to the hereafter, which is very traditionally religious. It was, we need a prophet to define a political ideology. When you've indoctrinated with these ideas that your sentiments, your feelings, your judgments, your ideas, your values, every single thing has to be in conformity with revelation. And revelation is what they're going to tell you is revelation. They're going to then interpret scripture, and there's a number of reasons why they believe the Quran is divine. And the prophetic traditions are divine. And they have a set of intelligible arguments for this. The end result...
Are you saying you were indoctrinated?
Yeah, they called this the process.
You are saying that you were indoctrinated?
I can tell you because I was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir for 12 years. And the process, we called it, is officially in their books, is in Arabic they call Dawr al-Thafqif, which means the stage of cultivating, of culturing. And we defined it in two ways. Changing the cognitive process. This is actually how we defined it in our literature. Changing the cognitive process and changing the behavioral psychology. So the way we do that is by changing the way people link reality to their priori knowledge and arrive at concepts. And then we change the way their motives are connected to those concepts, and we reshape the personality anew.
But aren't you selling yourself and your fellow, your ex-colleagues a little bit short as sort of rational human beings who can make their own minds up about what they believe?
I'm just trying to give you a description of what happened, and you can make your own judgment as to whether they're rational, sensible human beings or not. That's up to you. What I'm trying to explain is the process of indoctrination. And so actually, and this is dangerous, I think, as well. What people don't realize at the moment is, in general discussions I've had with people, is there's a fear to to say very clearly, look, it's the ideas of Islamism that is the problem. Either due to some type of like I said at the beginning, this romantic relativism, that it's some type of radicalism and it's all good. It's nonsense that it's all good. And or down to some type of, the whole, I realise probably not the best place to say this, slightly left-wing multiculturalism. What it has become is not a celebration of diversity and engagement and respect for other cultures. It's become tolerance of the intolerable. Yeah, and that is where we have to start drawing the line.
Is there anyone else who'd like to take up? Dolan?
And it's interesting to talk about changing the brain. It kind of goes back to the drug analogy, and I quite liked your idea that it's not so much opium as stimulants. You think kind of PCP or speed or something of the masses, getting people all cranked up and nervy and doing dangerous things. And I think in a sense that fits into a kind of classic moral panic. I mean, even down to sinister figures at the school gates, kind of who might influence kids, and do something about that. And I think in that sense, I would kind of be slightly dismissive of it, but there is obviously a problem. I think the problem is deeper though than those the kind of sinister figures at the school gate. I think it's a mistake to think you can defend secularism simply by getting rid of religion. It's a bit like the naivety of the Iraq invasion. You get rid of Saddam Hussein, and then suddenly Iraq will revert to a liberal democracy. As if a democracy is just the absence of dictatorship. And I think the same goes for secularism. It's not simply the absence of religion, but it has to have some kind of social structure and shared belief and meaning. I think it's true again that there's a difference. There are different kinds of religion that serve different purposes. I think the point that you make about cohering society and giving people kind of rules and a sense of identity is probably more true of something like Pentecostalism, which has become a major phenomenon around the world. I think that the radicalization thing is slightly different, particularly in Britain and Europe, where it's actually more dysfunctional, trying to over-psychologize it. But I think it's much more a kind of individual to do with people's relationship to society. It's not something which is sweeping society, but which attracts particular individuals, even against their own communities. It's not like there are Islamist communities in Britain. There are Muslim communities of which the Islamists actually defined against to a large extent. So I think that's the scale in which we have to think about things. I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah, very much quickly, because I want to get to more questions. But do you have anything to respond to that? The idea of some of that which Dolan said, that we're kind of in moral panic about this.
Well, I think rightly there is a panic about this because it's unacceptable. I think that's the thing. There is a trend in society under the guise of multiculturalism, under the guise of respect. The unacceptable is creeping in. And there's a panic, and rightly. Of course, there would be different, we're not sort of just observant, we are participant in this sort of situation. You have right wing, you have left wing, you have moderates, everybody's talking about it, but the essence is that people need to be concerned about this. But we need to discuss it rationally, we need to be able to discuss it and absorb, understand, and respond to it, but we can't ignore it, we have to respond to it. That comes to the issue of censorship. It's different. Yes, there's censorship in BBC to tell you, of course, the editorial rights of the Newsnight, they tell you what you have the right to have all the resources, all the newspapers, the censor, they tell you, of course you have that. That's different from actually stopping you from saying what you believe. That's a slightly different. You have organised your society, organised trade unions, organised your, different places, go and raise your voice. Yes, it is an unequal battle between the resources of, Robert Murdoch and, smaller organisations like mine. Yes, there is an unequal battle, but the battle is there to be fought. With Islamists, you don't have that right, and that's the difference. You do not have the right to think, you do not have the right to question, and it's sacred. Hence, you need to break up the sacred because it breaks up the whole infrastructure of the Islamist power base in Middle East and everywhere. I mean, that's the issue about the sacred and censorship. And the issue of, they would come to you, they would point, Islamists or this religious movements actually, not just Islamists, they point to the ills of society and capitalism. They do. But something that we are concerned about, prostitution, consumption of alcohol, 24-hour pubs opening. They'll point to those, But what the alternative they bring for you is barbarity, is not improvement in the life of people. We have all those issues, yes, but the point to ills of society, going backwards into something else which is, it doesn't. So to actually put and name it radical, equal, and praise it somehow, unconsciously, praise it, say, yes, okay, you've got to put it on par, I think is dangerous. Because they're different, because as a society, we are concerned about prostitution. Yes, we are concerned about, alcoholism. Yes, we're concerned about unemployment. Yes, we're concerned about all the ills of society generated and created wars by capitalism. Yes, we are. But they do not have the right, actually, morally, because what they are proposing is total barbarity for humanity, and that's the point. And that would point to all the ills of society to you. And this, I can tell you the story of how Islamists take power is line by line, the arguments, all of those, and that's actually repeating it in Britain. They will tell you, you want to get rid of the Arabs? Yeah, we punish them. We shoot them a couple of on the streets. There was the leader of the Islamists in one of the cities in Britain.
I'll have to stop you with that story a second, because I can see loads of people itching to get in. See there, Claire Fox.
I don't quite know where to start. Right, the first thing I wanted to say was... the first thing I wanted to say was that I think we're misplaced to entirely just concentrate on the rise of radical Islam, because actually the radical atheists, as it were, have made a fuss about the rise of religion in general. And for a number of years, going to different events, I kind of got bored with everyone telling me that the greatest threat was Christian Voice, who were those kind of people who picketed outside Jerry Springer the Opera. Everyone was saying, if we carry on, they're going to take over the world. They're going to destroy democracies. We know it. And it just seemed to me to be a panic and to be pointing at straw men. And I think that we have to be very careful of that. The thing when I hear Andrew speaking is, I think the greatest threat that the student Christian movement poses to us is not their Christianity, but the rubbish politics. Really, so obvious and so on. But nonetheless, the point is, I want to have a political row with him. I don't want to have a theological row with him. His problem is not theology for me. That's a quirk, right? He can have it. I don't care. On the other point, I thought the point about why people would join Hizb ut-Tahrir or anyone else that I just wanted to refer to is I spoke at a new university a few years ago at an Islamic Society meeting. And it was interesting because I was on the platform with a law lecturer from that university who explained that the students at the university were, hard to reach students who needed quite a lot of study skills and support, and they'd abolished exams in order to help them achieve more and feel better about themselves, and so on and so forth. Things which anybody who's familiar with the dumbing down of what's happening in universities will know is a kind of fairly regular event. And this was a law lecturer talking about law students. I ended up in this room full of law students who bored me rigid and everyone else with the detail of Sharia law, which they had remembered. It was a bit like your answer, Hizb ut-Tahrir came in and gave this, it might have been gobbledygook, but, it was at least challenging, the point being, and what happened was the students actually liked the fact that they were given some intellectual challenge. It might not have been very coherent, but it was actually a bit more appealing than a patronising, Western liberal who basically thought the kids weren't up to it, couldn't cope with being challenged. So I just think that the problem for me is not Hizb ut-Tahrir. The problem for me is, Western university law departments who do not believe that young people are capable of going beyond themselves. And in that sense, I have some sympathy with the way Dolan posed it, which is, the last thing I want is Hazel Blears to be the model of moderation for the nation's youth. What we all need to do is she's launched a task force against extremism, and we've all got to end up like her. God forbid, is all I could say. But I just think the problem is our side, not them. They're irrelevant, and, obscurantist rantings, I'm not frightened of it, I'm frightened of our side having nothing better to offer.
Hello, Peter Logan. If I have an affiliation, it is with the Radical Anthropology Group, .org, by the way. I was interested to see Dawkins' little film on religious fundamentalism. What he didn't, what he wasn't aware of, was his own fundamentalism, which he declared right at the beginning of the programme, but was completely unaware of it, and that is his attachment to Western civilization. Now, Western civilization spawned all the religions that we're familiar with. The monotheistic religions came out of and are part of Western democracy, Western civilization, which is why they are, and it is, a male supremacist way of working. Religions are basically male supremacist organisations, which have problems with women in all sorts of ways. But I mean, notwithstanding, there's a little infection from the second wave feminism in the Anglican Church on the periphery. But essentially, that is what they are. They were set up, as was Western civilization, with a specific agenda of women oppression. Blank stares. Can I just finish by attaching to your argument about the importance of whether we're serious about the debates which are coming now. The central reality of the world today and in the future is the world itself, of course, and what we're doing to it. And Sir David Attenborough, at the end of his little documentary on the state of the planet, standing on Easter Island, said that the future of life on this planet, and his documentary was about extinctions of life, which have been going ahead at a fairly rapid pace. The future of life on this planet depends on people's ability to take action. Now, a lot of people are doing all sorts of good things, fine, that's okay. But in order for real change to take place, we need to change our societies, we need to change our politics, and we need to change our economics. If we do not start the debate there, we might as well not say anything at all.
All right, thank you. Would you pass it just here and then right at the back afterwards?
Why isn't this about belief and radicalism? Let's forget the religious thing. I agree with Claire that it'll die of its own accord at some stage or other, become less of a problem at some stage or other. Some people would say that the tragedy of the 20th century was communism, that the destruction of any hope of a democratic socialist society in Russia by the Bolsheviks probably laid the foundation for Hitler and Mussolini as well, and a hell of a lot more besides for their own people. Millions of ordinary people, ordinary working people throughout the world believed in the Soviet Union, would not hear any of the truths about it, none of the facts. They may have left the Communist Party and then believed in Trotsky or somebody else. These days you can read popular columnists praising Chavez as a great leader and that the defender of the Venezuelan people and socialism and democracy in South America. It's a belief that allows them to do that. So I think the whole concept of belief is something we should rather be discussing. What happened to this massive democratic working class movement which existed all over the world and was getting stronger and was undermined by a whole number of factors, including belief?
That's very interesting. It seemed to be pointing something, if I just may say so, that it seems that anybody who proposes that one should change the world in whatever degree, however honourable and noble those aims may be, the repulse is always, well, that'll lead straight to the gulag. So there's a great deal of cynicism, it seems, but on the other hand, from the panel, a lot of emphasis on the need for change as well. So it'd be interesting to see if we can explore that question a little bit further. There's a question with someone right at the back.
There were just 2 points I wanted to raise very briefly. Firstly, a lot of young people and other people have hopes, aspirations, ideals and beliefs for a better world for themselves and others. And you wonder how they get sidetracked, if you like, down this road of what has been well expressed tonight, the reactionary road of religion and all that it entails. And from what people have said tonight, a chap at the front basically criticising the last 2,000 years of Western civilization, as he puts it. As far as I'm concerned, that's that's all we've got is the Western civilization. How's that different from how the Hizb ut-Tahrir would criticise 2,000 years of Western civilization? Rashad's, it's all very well, your world weariness and your suspicion of belief, but we have to do better if we want to inspire people. We have to take the best of what the world has offered, culturally, intellectually, socially, whatever, up to now, and find a way to engage with people, to take things forward from where we are. Just shrugging our shoulders and saying, oh, belief's really bad, isn't Western civilization really bad? I think the religious people, unfortunately, may still make further inroads. And the other point I just wanted to make is, whenever I have this discussion, I was thinking of Moazzam Begg, and it shows a soft underbelly, if you like, of our secular society. Somebody who went over to Afghanistan to meet up with the Taliban or whatever, ended up in Guantanamo Bay. But when he came back, he was very much the pin-up of the liberal intelligentsia. And I remember going to a meeting in East London where a secular friend of mine was on a panel and basically criticised him for supporting the Taliban. And he was howled down by a whole number of secular liberals who basically said he was misunderstood, he was a really good guy, good intentions, that he was building a women's refuge in Afghanistan under the Taliban, which is a likely story. But generally, the point is, somebody like that who you wouldn't really give, obviously had a bad experience in Guantanamo Bay, but you wouldn't give him the time of day for his ideas, was hailed as a kind of pin-up amongst very respectable people. The New Statesman featured him quite widely in other publications from what I remember. And if that's the best of secular society, that's where the problem is. That's what we've got to, it's within secular society that we can begin to turn things around so that those other extreme people don't have the influence. But I think we should look closer to home when we're looking at those things. Thank you.
All right, I see someone there at the back, and then someone there in the middle, and then we'll come back to the panel.
I just have a question for the panel, really prompted by something Andrew said in his introduction, that I'm very tempted by the idea of taking up the cudgels of truth against power, and I can see the appeal for that to anybody with any idealism, and particularly any young person. And I still see the appeal. I mean, is there an elephant in the room here? And can the panel tell me what their conceptions of truth are? Because I don't see the problem as being a lone man in robes with a beard on the underground telling me what right and wrong is. My problem in the world is that everybody is telling me that there is no right and wrong. And everything that I believe is right, I shouldn't say, because it will offend somebody else's conception of the right. And it's that relativism that I find completely cynical. And I know that you can't base a political movement on disbelief. There has to be some truth and objective reality if we want to change the world. So what do the panelists conceive of as being the truth?
I'll have to do that quickly. We just have just there in the middle, yeah.
I think it's worth making the point that there are differences between different countries and the appeal of religion in those countries compared to, say, in Britain. So I think that the appeal of Islam and Islamist parties in places like Egypt, for instance, do have more of a grassroots base because organisations like the Muslim Brotherhood provide welfare services. That's by no way condoning what they are and what they represent, but they have in a way a certain rootedness in those societies which comes out of political changes, which comes out of the decline of left-wing parties and you could say the ending support of left-wing parties in the West for those movements. But I think what's interesting is that the appeal of religion in places like Britain is quite different because I think sometimes we overstate the extent to which young people actually do believe in a religious identity. And I was quite struck recently with the story of the suicide village. Was it Bridgeford? I can't remember the name of it. Bridgend, sorry. Yeah. This idea that people would young people committing suicide out of a kind of celebrity desire for status or whatever, and whether it's true or not, it struck me how similar, there were certain features that were similar to the suicide bombers, the 7/7 bombers, in that these 7/7 bombers weren't notably actually very religious before they went in. They didn't seem to have rehearsed religious scripture by heart, but this idea of the idea of dying for some kind of longevity, for some kind of memory, the idea of fame, the idea of being associated with a movement, things which are not quite narcissistic, which I think reflect more of a celebrity culture and a more of a kind of, well, just general social trends. And I think sometimes we overstate the importance or the kind of idealism of religion because we are unable to explain and understand why anyone would fall into that kind of trap, would become, as we see it, brainwashed. Why would they be brainwashed? But I think that something else is going on there, and so perhaps the fear of religion, we shouldn't be so afraid of it because actually it's not that appealing. It's something else that's going on. It's something that we can fix.
All right, I think Ferry Boris, you wanted to come back on that. That political Islam is just a reflection of celebrity culture, not to caricature what's been said.
So just one point. I don't think religion is spreading. That's the statement I want to make. Organised political religious movements are gaining grounds. But religion as numbers actually are not spreading as such. People are running away from religion as far as I can see. People are, even sort of people who kept quiet, people are sort of, this is not acceptable. So I think we need to differentiate. I agree with you. I don't think young people are actually running towards religion. Everybody's becoming religious. I see my son who's 18-year-old with all his friends. They have no inclination to actually go towards sort of religious groups of any kind. Yes, there is the issues about the values and what is the truth. What are the values? What are the standards? I think the improvement of humans' life, that's the standard for me. And is it worthy of my respect? That's always I say. Would I want something to implement it for myself, for my children, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, all of those? Are you prepared? Archbishop of Canterbury, is he prepared to actually have his sort of domestic issues be governed by Sharia law? And if you are prepared to advocate that for yourself, then you have the right to actually advocate it for others. If you don't, if somebody sort of was arguing with me about sort of, the benefits of private medicine, I said I do not advocate private medicine. I want sort of medicine at the point of need, because when my child, if his hands break, I don't want to charge him. I just want to say at the first point I want to make sure that is he gets a plaster and he gets he gets better. That's what I want for everybody else. So is it worthy of my respect? Do I want to implement it for myself? Then I would support it and back it, and that's my value. And I think universal rights, universal values have been undermined from all sides. From the dominant superpowers from the United States, from the Islamists, all of those, because I think they're two sides of the same coin, and that's important. You need to,
we want to get some more people in. So, Andrew, you're attacked quite directly.
Yes, I was, and I don't know what to grip onto that in by way of response.
You can do it later. I'll just make it general.
And actually, it would be interesting to talk to you about some of that. But actually, what I would like to address is some other questions. A chat past the panel, actually, what do we think truth is? And I mean, I've already said a bit about that, so I don't want to dwell on it. But I think one thing that's important to say is that I don't think that truth is something that can be mapped out. And I think that's the danger of the rhetoric of rationality in secular society at the moment. And particularly somebody else raised the question of identity and the strength of Islamic identity as being something that we are threatened by and maybe even jealous of. I think actually it's a mirror or mirrored in politics and current affairs at the moment, with the talk of Britain for the British lessons for immigrants, and the idea that, or the notion that the homogeneous radical Islam and the fear of going into Muslim areas. There's a strong identity politics at work, and it's not just in terms of religion. I mean, somebody was telling me the other day that the list of definitions of sexuality now runs to pages. we have a problem with floating free and creativity. And I think this is one of the areas in which religion, to address another question, is actually still very relevant. Churches are still one of the few places where people of different class, subsets, sexual self-definitions mix side by side, and of course it often causes a lot of tension. But religion is also relevant, though it's lost the way of intuitively translating its theological language, and I hope I've not done too badly on that tonight, in a way that makes sense to a person who doesn't have an intuitive idea of God and the relevancy of these things. But when it comes to the ethical and the political aspirations of religion, you might think, for example, that when the moratorium on the death penalty recently came to the UN, it was largely through the workings of the Catholic Church and religious organisations in Chad. When the protests over renewing nuclear weapons in Britain, I know, for example, that the protests about that were led in Scotland by religious leaders and were mostly organised around the churches. Amnesty Oxfam owe part of their origins to religion.
Sorry,
And,
yes,
I can't go on with
Dawn,
it.
would you like to come back on any of that there? Or should we...
we'll take some...
We'll take a last round of questions before we allow the panel to sum up, actually. And please keep your questions succinct, actually, because I'm kind of running out of time. Can I see hands? Yeah, just these two gentlemen here at the front.
I was going to say, if we didn't have Hizb ut-Tahrir, if we didn't have Hizb ut-Tahrir, we'd have to invent it in order to have something against which you can try and get definition in this amorphous, relativistic, secular blob that we're all stuck in. It kind of helps to have someone on the outside that you can all point the finger at. And the reason I say that is 10 years ago this year, I was in Blackpool when the National Union of Students banned Hizb ut-Tahrir in a decision that was fixed before the conference. And it seemed to me that, we almost built Hizb ut-Tahrir to be the other that we could feel good about in contrast to. But I thought it might be useful if the panelists would say where they would have stood in that debate. Because I'm still not quite clear where the dividing line is between resisting the temptation to use tin pot religious hate figures for our own ends and actually standing up to what has to be stood up to.
All right, just right next to you.
Hi, yeah. Is this working actually? It's funny, you can't hear it when you... Yeah, okay. I agree with people that have said that we need to be more robust, really, about the principles that we're supposed to hold. I think that there's a lot of willingness and hypocrisy within Western liberalism, and I think that, that the people that we have a problem with in other parts of the world that quite justifiably identify and understand that double standard and use it against us. A senior official in the Afghanistan government, the chap that's the young journalist that's been banged up for downloading articles about women's rights in Afghanistan, a senior Afghanistan official who agreed with the death sentence that was imposed upon that journalist, said, well, free speech isn't an absolute. Look at the situations in the West where free speech is curtailed. And he pointed to a situation in Germany and Austria where Holocaust denial is obviously illegal in those countries. I'm an active anti-fascist, and I don't really have an awful lot of sympathy with people that go around denying the Holocaust. But I do support their right to do that.
All right, thank you. And then I think there's some right at the back. And if that's it for questions, then I'm going to come back to the panel to ask you to sum up quickly.
We've heard a lot on the panel about standing up and confronting religion, about protecting secularism, about not putting up with cultural relativism. The only person who mentioned humanism on the panel, as I can recall, is Dolan. And what I'd just like to ask the panel, religious or non-religious, is to give me one argument against anything, but an argument for humanism.
All right, before I ask the panel just to sum up, can I just make a note of something? It seems that with regard to religion, we're stuck between two opposite sides. One, which is something like Richard Dawkins, who will not only bash religion, but bash the religious believers and talk about the reptile brain of middle America, and just call any believer just an idiot, basically. And on the other side, a sort of total relativism edging into nihilism. And I think it doesn't need to be one or the other. I think we could make a call for genuine tolerance, but at the same time, a really kind of more rigorous belief in truth and a belief in one's own ideas. Let me just ask now the panel to sum up, and please keep it brief, just a minute and a half, and in the order in which you first spoke, starting with Rashad.
Okay, I'd start off, I wouldn't call Richard Dawkins an idiot. Me personally, I wouldn't do that. Anybody else, I can empathise completely why they would take that perspective, purely because of his bigoted attitude. Coming back, to summarise, I was going to say, look, we've kind of been through an enlightenment, a renaissance, and so on and so forth here. Just a number of things very quickly. Those enlightenment ideas, they're not new ideas. They were ideas that were taken by the Greeks. They came across through the Iraqi culture, North Africa. The Muslims took it on board. They came via Spain, and they didn't necessarily add that much to it. I don't think the Muslims added a lot to the Enlightenment ideas, but they kind of acted as a vehicle for which Enlightenment took place. Enlightenment taking place, the majority of those philosophers were deists. The majority of our intellectual heritage were believers in God. They did not see a contradiction between being a sentient, rational, intelligent human being and having an intelligent belief in God. So our process of enlightenment and modernity wasn't a product of atheism. It wasn't a product of theism either. It was a product of rationale. And this is, I think, why I kind of avoided the question about what do we actually believe in truth. I have a desire not to give you just a woolly response, which is what I kind of think is difficult when you have 90 seconds or even 7 minutes to when you're going to start talking about what you believe as truths and alternatives. But fundamentally, I think when you start defining what you mean in humanism, I think that's kind of where it becomes problematic. It's kind of the problem with intellectualizing every single matter, which is something that everyone feels on a basic human level. I don't think you can put an argument to say why killing is bad intellectually. I think it's nonsense to start going down these lines. I think it's something inherently everyone feels intuitively, and I think that's just our nature. And from there, we have to decide where our values, our traditions, and our context and our situation, what they're going to be. And that's kind of summarising what I believe. In terms of, yes, I agree, the discussion, to be fair to everyone on the panel, it's centred around radicalism and religion. So maybe we've kind of focused on radicalism and religion, and therefore not maybe discussed in an elaborate way where our actual beliefs and view towards every other political matter and our alternative politics are, which is why I think your criticism was a little bit unfair, seeing as he hadn't put his criticism. But the only criticism I would make is reiterate, when people talk about environment, economy, policy, injustice, I'm sorry, I don't think that's got anything to do with the Bible or the Quran. I don't think I read the Quran and then say, you know something? Just having an institution set up gaining compound interest when it's gone into another society, another country, to help that economy, there's a basic conflict of interest there. That's not something I get from the Quran, it's my observation of what I see. And therefore my policies are going to be built around that context. And the Quran inspires me to seek justice, but essentially that's a human endeavour which we're always going to grasp and grapple with, and I don't think there's one answer. And that's what I meant by I have a problem with idealism and ideology, not I have a problem with people having ideas.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think the question about humanism is maybe good point for me to sum up. I remember reading recently a small quotation from one of the leaders of the radical orthodoxy, which suggested that nihilism is closer to Christianity than humanism, seeing as at least nihilism realizes that without God everything is meaningless. Actually, I quite disagree. I think Christianity is more allied with humanism in that in Christianity, or at least radical Christianity, there is the death of the big other, the death of the God who maps everything out and tells us what's what, and things derive their meaning from authoritative statements, which is the sort of God that humanism gives up. Yet humanism recognizes, as Christianity does, the surprising givenness of truth and beauty and moral courage. And I think that by rescuing the public sphere, both for religion and for humanism, there is a great scope to complement and enhance a mutual critique of both religion and political practice. I think the danger is that on the one hand you have a religion that claims to be entirely revealed and we cannot know anything without it, but also the secularism and the politics that raises the human into the place of God and decides life and death in its place, which is something that I think could have been explored more tonight.
All right, thank you. Boris.
I think in terms of humanism, I think my sort of idea is that wherever humans are being replaced by other sort of authorities, with the God, states, self-appointed people, that's dangerous. And people need to make decisions and have the right, actually. But humanism as a broader sort of subject, that's I don't think it's debate for tonight. But I'm happy to sit down and talk about humanism. But I think it's important. Humanism comes into place in this discussion. It comes into this play role where humanity has been replaced by ideas, faith, religion, other institutions and governments, and that's humanity has been pushed aside by the other sort of institutions have taken place, or other ideas have taken place, and they have a right rather than human beings. I mean, that's a debate we could have. I wouldn't ban Hizbollah, and I would make sure they actually wither away by exposing them, and supporting them, and not supporting and not funding them, and making sure that they're exposed 100%. I would not ban any organisation, because that's it. It's unless the sort of, I would, if it's really, really, somebody is sort of criminal, you might, you need to prove that, the criminal answer, or use the law that they exist to actually, to persecute them. But an organisation as an idea, I wouldn't ban any organisation. I wouldn't give them a platform. I wouldn't invite them to speak, and I expose them as far as possible. Or not, But that's different from banning. Banning means sort of totally sort of denying, and I think that's not healthy actually, because that sort of starts the idea of that ideas could be banned. You can't ban ideas effectively, because that's embodiment, and organisations are embodiment of ideas. You can't ban them. I wouldn't ban fascist organisations, but I make sure that they would. I make sure that they're fully exposed, and the force of the society is to immunise society, against sort of fascism effectively, as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't ban. So it's a debate to be had, I think, about this. I think poor Richard Dawkins, he's an atheist. He's arguing his case. He's an atheist. That's not secularism, that's atheism. He's arguing his case, he's putting his scientific sort of arguments. Challenge him if you can. Challenge him if you can, but don't deny the fact that he's an atheist and he's arguing his case. And I support him, I fully support what he says. But I think the issue of religion is not to actually go and prove that it's very unscientific. Religion is a social matter, and I think you need to be, dealt with at the social level as well. You can't have sort of, Dawkins just continuously. You can't defeat religion by sort of those sort of arguments. You need to have that. It's important to continuously expose and show how irrational and, stupid the core of idea of religion is. But that's not all of the matter. The issue is about, it's a social issue, a social movement, and you need to challenge them socially. And that's the second thing which is missing from there. And that, I think, the other thing about secularism is that it has a role to play. It's a standard we need to keep. Because there is an element of universality in there, and that's very valuable and precious.
All right, thank you. And finally, Dolan.
Thanks. Well, when Martin Luther found out that the Italian priests didn't believe in transubstantiation, he had various options. He could have abandoned his own belief and adopted their cynicism, or just given up. He could have clung dogmatically to that belief and insisted that other people did too, because that's what the church was supposed to believe. Instead, he read his Bible and he thought and agonized about it, and he came up with his own theory. And in fact, while later Protestants abandoned transubstantiation altogether, his theory was called consubstantiation, which basically means that, yeah, it's still bread and wine, but it's sort of also at the same time blood and flesh, which is a kind of eerie premonition of postmodern relativism. But the important thing is that he thought about it and he took responsibility for his ideas. And when that idea started to take off, the idea that people could develop their own ideas and that could have an effect, it changed the world, or at least it helped to change the world. I think that's not the same as multiculturalism. I agree that multiculturalism is a problem, but for me the problem isn't that we tolerate people with cranky ideas, but that we encourage people to believe that their own ideas are only ever their own ideas and they can't convince anyone else of them. The idea that there are parallel communities that never overlap. And I think that ultimately you can convince people, or they might convince you, but I think we all have commensurable ideas. And the reason for that is that the truth is that human beings collectively make the world, and we're collectively responsible for the world. And we should accept that without deferring to religion or to the market or even to nature, but looking to each other. And for me, that's the kind of radicalism that we need.
Great. Can we thank all our speakers?